The word woke has really caught on in the past few years. I've seen Melanie Mack and Stuttering Craig and Yellow Flash use it on side-scrollers all the time. I've seen my pals Sargon and Arch and V all use it. I've even started to see more center-left lib types begin to use it to make fun of absurd progressives. The way it's used by most people is to make a vague gesture towards hyper-progressive, quasi-socialist politics, and the fuzziness around the label has allowed for some strange baggage to be snuck in with the word. For example, I've seen people refer to Sweet Baby Inc. as woke, which fits, but I've also seen people declare that simply having a black person in a video game or a TV show is woke, which is frankly ridiculous. Seeing as there is something real being pointed at with the word woke, but also that people regularly miss the mark with it, I'm going to actually explain the concept behind the label. Yes, I know I did this video a year ago, where that one right-wing author, Bethany Mendel, went viral after Brianna Joy Gray asked her in an interview what woke meant, and she couldn't answer.
Probably fewer of them consider themselves to be woke, and so, when we talk about traditional...
What does that mean to you? Would you mind defining woke? Because it's come up a couple times, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
So, woke is sort of the idea that this is going to be one of those moments that goes viral. Woke is something that's very hard to define, and we've spent an entire chapter defining it.
But frankly, I'm not satisfied with my work back then, so I'm going to take another crack at it. Let's start with what I actually did do correctly, though. Last year, some dumb online lefty pulled the same card on me, asking me what wokeism is. I replied with this. Wokeism is the ethics and processes of socialism, expanded beyond class struggle to include race struggle, gender struggle, sexual struggle, and any other near infinite number of marginalized groups, as defined by intersectionality. This ended up being a good enough definition that I've seen it repeated a few times online, even by random people I don't know or who don't follow me. So hey, if this is going to end up being my main contribution to the wider conversation, that's fine by me. But let's go a bit deeper into this description and really figure out what makes it work. When I'm saying socialism here, let's start with the basic definition. Socialism is an economic and political philosophy encompassing diverse economic and social systems characterized by social ownership of the means of production, as opposed to private ownership. It describes the economic, political, and social theories and movements associated with the implementation of such systems. I'm going to go on a long commie diatribe here, so I want you to know right now, I personally don't support this stuff. I am describing to you the ideas of the communists. I don't need to add more fuel to the dev as a communist fire here. For Karl Marx, class is specifically defined by its relationship to the means of production, aka the tools used to create products. Marx identified two main classes. First, the proletariat. These people work the means of production but don't own them. They sell their labor to the owner in exchange for a wage, and the amount of leftover money after the cost of tools and materials and labor are subtracted from the sale price of the product is called surplus value. Marx believed the owner stole this surplus value from the proletariat. Secondly, the bourgeois. These people own the means of production but don't work them. They contribute no labor to the production process. They make their money simply by extracting rents from it. This is the surplus value if we're talking about manufacturing a physical good, but it can also literally mean rent if the person in question is a landlord whose product is housing. Marx identified two other classes which aren't important to the topic: the lumpen proletariat and the petty bourgeois. These two are their own topic for another time. But for our purposes today, it's the proletariat and the bourgeois. Those who work but don't own, and those who own but don't work. These two groups have inherently opposing interests due to their differing relationship to the means of production. The bourgeois is always incentivized to extract as much surplus value from the proletariat as he can, and the proletariat is always incentivized to resist this process. This is a zero-sum game, whereas one class achieves what it wants, the other must necessarily lose just as much. Marxists believe that these inherently opposing interests cannot be aligned or coordinated. It doesn't matter if an individual bourgeois member is a good person, or if he is willing to give back some of the surplus value in order to placate his workers. His existence requires at least some exploitation, and the only way to not exploit is to not be bourgeois and provide labor to the enterprise. Any negotiation between these two classes is necessarily always temporary, as over time their class interests will reassert themselves, and the space gained by the negotiation will have been spent. Therefore, class conflict is inevitable. As capitalism advances, the bourgeois becomes richer, the proletariat becomes more desperate, and the tipping point of revolution will always be reached. Marx's historical materialism is his theory of history, his attempt to explain why human history unfolded the way that it did. His conclusion was that it was this class conflict that was the primary driver of history. All of the various wars and revolutions, and the creation of new states and new philosophies, and all other human action, they all had their source in the growing economic divide between those who work and those who own, and the inevitable class conflict this divide creates. Marx was obviously wrong about this. History is littered with the examples of people, of classes, of whole countries or kingdoms doing things for non-economic reasons. But nonetheless, the Marxist analytical lens is the lens of class conflict. And the people who take that lens up, whether they are nominally left-wing or right-wing doesn't matter, they are some flavor of socialist, even if they disagree with Marx in all respects. So, when I said wokeism is the ethics and processes of socialism, here's what I was referring to. The processes of socialism? That's the belief that class conflict drives everything. The proletariat and the bourgeois have an inherently different relationship to the means of production. This difference creates opposing class interests, and these interests are irreconcilable, meaning that class war is inevitable. Negotiation can't solve the problem, it only serves to forestall it. And a smart person would use the temporary peace only as space to prepare for the next war. The ethics of socialism? That's referring to the moral superiority of the proletariat. The bourgeois are the exploiter class. They are the ones extracting the surplus value from the proletariat. They also wield disproportionate power over the proletariat. A worker must sell his wage to a boss in order to survive. Liberalism may have granted him the freedom to choose which boss, but he must nonetheless sell his labor or starve. But the boss, if any one worker decides not to work for him, it's no big deal. There's always another worker that he can hire. Therefore, any negotiation between the proletariat and the bourgeois has an inherent power imbalance in favor of the bourgeois, making the negotiation itself coercive and exploitative. It's for this reason that socialist morality isn't concerned with rules or deeds. It's concerned with outcomes, and only outcomes in favor of the proletariat. Anything is permitted as long as the proletariat serve to benefit, because they are the oppressed underclass. This is why you might see a leftoid online analyze a situation by asking who's being exploited or who has the power when talking about morality. Because, contrary to the liberal idea of a universal moral principle, for the socialist, the exact same action can be good or evil depending on the class of the target. Put simply, this is the doing bad things to bad people is good argument. So, if wokeism is the ethics and processes of socialism, that means that wokeism is the idea of two classes with irreconcilable differences, where one class is morally superior to and exploited by the other, and that this state of affairs inevitably leads to class warfare. The second part of my definition reads, expanded beyond class struggle to include race struggle, gender struggle, sexual struggle, and any other near infinite number of marginalized groups, as defined by intersectionality. Let's pull up intersectionality's definition too. Intersectionality is a sociological analytical framework for understanding how groups and individuals' social and political identities result in unique combinations of discrimination and privilege. Examples of these factors include gender, caste, sex, race, ethnicity, class, sexuality, religion, disability, height, age, weight. These intersecting and overlapping social identities may be both empowering and oppressing. Oh man, I like how Wikipedia here admits that there's no good data on how useful this concept is. That's just great. Back in my video on Antonio Gramsci and his ideological descendants, I mentioned that intersectionality as a concept was invented in 1989 by Kimberly Crenshaw, a black activist. Back in university when I took gender studies, the metaphor used by the professor to describe intersectionality was the bars of a cage or bars of a jail model, where each vector of oppression constituted one bar. If you're white, male, financially privileged, attractive, intelligent, able-bodied, but you're gay, you might experience some oppression for being gay. But that only constitutes one bar. And a jail cell with one bar can't really hold anyone back. But if you're oppressed among multiple dimensions, then there's multiple bars, and now the jail cell begins to form. In the early 2010s, the short-lived term, the kyriarchy, was coined to try and push online feminism away from simply focusing on the patriarchy using the intersectional model, though the idea didn't really catch on. But if you observe the intersectional model, what you'll notice about these vectors of oppression and privilege is that individually, they each form opposing class dichotomies. Male and female, white and non-white, straight and gay, cis and trans, able and disabled. Any intersectional identity can be conceptualized in this way. When I said that the ethics and processes of socialism were expanded beyond class struggle to include marginalized groups as defined by intersectionality, what I was specifically referring to was applying the Marxian lens of class conflict to these groups as well, not just the proletariat and bourgeois. Let's run through the logic. Let's do it with America's #1 identitarian conflict, white versus black. If we were to take the Marxian lens and then plug white into the place of the bourgeois and black into the place of the proletariat, what does the ethics and processes of socialism look like now? Well, like the two social classes, the two races must have inherently different and opposing interests. But instead of class interests, they're now race interests. These race interests are inherently irreconcilable, meaning a racial war is the only outcome. The whites are the exploiter race. They only extract from blacks. They wield disproportionate power over blacks as well. And any negotiation between the two races has an inherent power imbalance in favor of whites, making the act of negotiation coercive and exploitative. Their moral calculations aren't concerned with rules or deeds, only outcomes in favor of the black race, because their exploitation means anything is permitted as long as they serve to benefit. That is what the ethics and processes of socialism looks like, applied not to Marx's class conflict, but America's race conflict. And now that I've laid it out to you, it probably feels like you've just peered inside the brain of a BLM activist who spends all their time screaming about how evil the white man is. What I've described here is the black activist ideological programming, the preset list of instructions that automatically runs in their brains when they think about matters of race. By the way, if you take a look inside the head of a white supremacist, you'll see the exact same logic, just with the white and black variables switched. A lot of the intellectual writing of the modern white identitarian movement inherits its logic from the Nazis' own political philosophy. You know that IQ bell curve meme? The low IQ position is saying that Nazism is socialism because it's in the name. The middle IQ position is coping about fascism being capitalism and decay, and Nazis literally coining the term privatization. None of that is real, by the way, but that's a future video. The high IQ position is understanding that National Socialism was named because it was socialism for one nation only, and because it used the socialist method of analyzing class conflict adapted to the conflict between nations. Looking at that intersectional wheel again, we can see how this oppressor-oppressed lens can be adapted to each of these dichotomies, and how the resulting thought process is identical to the politics of the various strands of woke activist. Straight or gay, cis or trans, whatever. A common one in geopolitics on the left right now is Jew versus Palestinian. It is the ethics and processes of socialism applied to these dichotomic groups. Of course, in reality, this is actually an extremely bigoted way of framing the relationship between these groups, despite woke people proclaiming themselves to be hyper-inclusive. There's an assumption built into the logic of the system that just as the proletariat and bourgeois inherently have opposing class interests, so must every other oppressor and oppressed group. But that doesn't actually really work. And as you think more about it, it sounds fucking insane. How is it that gay people and straight people, for example, as two different classes, inherently have opposing class interests? Any sane person will tell you they don't, that's retarded. But remember, the extraction of surplus value from the proletariat to the bourgeois is a zero-sum game. When one class wins, the other class must lose in this framework. What constitutes a zero-sum game when it comes to these other identities? Well, there's a couple ways that a zero-sum game could emerge. One way is replacism. Here's an example. Assume you have 10 seats open in a school course, and the 10 best student applicants are all straight white men. Then the school's diversity quota requires that 3 of those seats be filled by black queer women or something. You necessarily must replace 3 of those white men, because the number of seats are finite. When there's a fixed amount of space, diversity requires replacement, and functions as a zero-sum game, which is something that I went into in my competency crisis video. Another way is representation. You see this one in media literacy conversations a lot, where intersectional activists want characters to be made representative of their preferred demographics, even at the expense of the art itself. It doesn't matter what the character was before, race swapping them to be black or claiming they're now queer, or alternatively introducing a new black queer woman character for the old beloved character to play second fiddle to. These are acts that center the traditionally marginalized demographic, which has historically existed on the fringes. In this way, representation becomes its own zero-sum game, as there is a finite amount of space in the spotlight. Now that we know this is how the woke activist views these things, everything clicks into place. We know why they push diversity, but what I'm describing here is what they're thinking when they do it. If class conflict is an inevitable zero-sum game where they can only win or lose, and where the oppressed group has a moral license to do whatever they want to their oppressors, then it suddenly makes sense that every woke person screaming about the evils of inequality nonetheless hypocritically advocates for unequal treatment. Going all the way back to the beginning then, when I said wokeism is the ethics and processes of socialism expanded beyond class struggle to include race struggle, gender struggle, sexual struggle, and any other near infinite number of marginalized groups, as defined by intersectionality, I hope you now understand what I mean. It doesn't mean that there's a black or gay person in your video game or in your movie, at least not necessarily. It means that the socialist way of viewing the world, where everything stems from an inevitable class conflict where the only possible outcome is fully winning or fully losing, no draws, no opt-outs, is adapted to the various identity dichotomies of intersectionality. This is an extremely toxic way of thinking. Imagine believing that because you are black, the whites are your eternal enemy. Your differences can never be reconciled, and you are destined to engage in a race war that must eventually end with the annihilation of one side. and that any peace is temporary and should be used as a pretext to prepare for the next war. There absolutely are black activists out there who think this way, and white activists as well from the other side. And these people ruin it for fucking everyone because the normies don't actually agree with them. It's also an extremely retarded way of thinking too. Imagine believing that because you are trans, cis people are your eternal enemy. Your differences can never be reconciled. You are destined to engage in a war with them, etc., etc. The unhinged and frankly unearned militancy and extremism of all of these various identitarian groups on the left. They're all different, but they all use the same playbook. It's because it's this playbook. It's Marxist playbook. By the way, Marx wouldn't actually agree with any of this himself. This is a long-standing internal fight among the socialists, with more orthodox Marxists being branded as class reductionists by the intersectional socialists for, well, reducing everything to the class conflict. Contemporary Marxists believe that bigotry is a product of capitalism and will be automatically solved after capitalism is abolished. Intersectional socialists believe that each intersectional identity must engage in its own class war and that all of them must be won before socialism can be achieved. So, when a right-wing person says that wokeism is communism or Marxism or socialism or whatever, though they probably don't exactly know what they're talking about, there is something there. They're not exactly the same thing, and most people who we'd call woke, aren't going to want what Marx himself wanted. But it's the same way of thinking, the same analytical lens, applied to all oppressor and oppressed dynamics. And when a left-wing person tells you that you're insane, this isn't happening, you're just peddling that bigoted cultural Marxist conspiracy theory again. This is either lies to deflect or ignorance of their own theories. This is what it is. This is where it came from. And if you push them on it, it won't take long for them to say, oh yeah, this is actually happening and it's good. Woke means the ethics and processes of socialism applied to intersectional identitarian conflict. That is its definition. That is what we should mean when we say woke, that is what we should present when asked, and that is what we should use when talking about these ideas.